Well, what's that saying that the guys on Roadkill say? I'm doing the right thing the wrong way. Well, that's pretty much what I'm doing with this block. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Cranky Motorsports. Doing some more work on the Bel Air. I got the wiring all done. You saw that in the last video. And I've been doing some soul searching on the motor because the 305 that's in the car right now has been backfiring out the driver's side. Well, I think it's on the driver's side. Sounds like it's backfiring on the driver's side every single time I start it up. The exhaust on the driver's side of the car is making a chuffing sound, like chuff, 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 chuff. I think it has some cracked rings, and that would actually explain a whole heck of a lot of stuff. Why I can never seem to get the carburetor tuned right. It always smells like it's dumping raw fuel out the left side of the car. Why it starts funny and it doesn't run consistently every time I get it warmed up. Also, why it's backfiring out the exhaust on the driver's side of the car. I think it has low compression in at least 2 cylinders on the left side of the car because of cracked rings. So I have a couple of choices. That 350 4-bolt main that I picked up from my uncle a couple of videos ago, that one, I took it to the machine shop, and my machine shop guy said that the rust in the cylinders was worse than I expected. He didn't think you could just hone it out, even though, again, for backyard redneckery, I probably would just hone it and put it together, but he said it was pretty bad. Might actually have to be bored out more. He said the crank needed to be turned, the block needed to be line honed for the crank journals, and basically everything else would have to be assembled. So originally I was going to have him hot tank the block and try to hone out the cylinders and see where I stood on that, and see if I could put it together with just, you know, doing a hone job, line hone on the mains, and turn the crank and stuff, and then put the pistons back on the rods. But even doing all of that work, I would probably be into it for about $800 or $900 just in machine work. Then if the pistons didn't work because he had to bore it out, it would be another $200 for pistons, or roughly thereabout. Rings, all the bearings and everything else. So I would be into it for $1,200 to $1,500 before I could get that 350 in my car. I could take the 305 back out of the car, pull the bottom end apart, hopefully all the bearings are still good, and just re-ring it, put it all back together. But if I did that, I'd want to put a different cam in it because the cam is actually too big for that motor. It's a 470 lift cam, and really those heads that I have in the car should probably only have about a 450 lift cam. So if I pulled it apart, I would put a different cam in at a 450 lift, 106 lobe separation angle to give it a little bit more lump. But realistically, I could have done it for, I don't know, $400, $450 for that. The other option was to try to find another lower end and put the top end from my 305 on another lower end. And lo and behold, searching Facebook Marketplace, I found what appears to be a pretty good deal. So let me show you what I got. So this somewhat grimy engine block here is yet another 010 high nickel 4-bolt main 350 standard bore. It's been rebuilt. These are flat top pistons, and what looks like a ridge on the cylinder is not a ridge, it's actually just carbon from running. So this engine has been rebuilt. I know that because I pulled the oil pan off of it, and all the main caps and all the rod bearings and rod caps and everything have been stamped with numbers. All the freeze plugs in this have been done not that long ago, and definitely there's just barely any surface rust in this cylinder. I mean, it literally just almost wipes off with my finger. No pitting that I can see. So I think what I'm going to do with this block is pull the bottom end out of it, hone the cylinders, check the rings. If the rings aren't broken, I'll probably just put it back together. Otherwise, I will re-ring it, put it back together, and basically go from there. The only set of heads I have right now are a set of, I think they're 58cc 305 heads, which I had put on another 350 that I had built for my 81 Cutlass. And realistically, a 305 HO head, they have small combustion chambers, they have relatively small runners on them. But for a motor that you're only going to push to about 5,000 or 5,200 RPM, they're more than enough. And they give you a lot of low-end torque. They give you tons of grunt. They just don't have a lot of flow up top. So that's probably what I'm going to do to this. If I run the 305 heads, I will probably end up running about a 450, maybe a 455 lift cam in this. Really depends on what I want to do, but because the car has 308 gears in it and a mid-ratio transmission, you kind of have to get off the line at a pretty high RPM to get this thing rolling. And then once you're rolling, it just cruises. I mean, I've taken it around the yard just enough to be able to shift through the gears. I've gotten it all the way into third gear. It shifts nice and quiet. The rear end's nice and quiet. But being that I'm going to pull the motor out of it, it gives me the opportunity to do a few things that I've been wanting to do anyway. So clean up the engine bay a little bit more. I want to modify the exhaust a little bit on this. To be perfectly honest, these turbo tubes, probably not the best mufflers for this car. What it is a 2.5 inlet and outlet muffler, but inside that muffler, instead of being like a glass pack where it just has a straight through design that's packed around with glass, this actually has like two 1.5 inch perforated tubes inside to turn it into a turbo muffler, which is why the car is pretty quiet. But the problem with that is going from a 2.5 inch exhaust down to a 1.5 inch exhaust is pretty restrictive on the flow of the car. So I might cut those out and actually just put in a regular cherry bomb glass pack. That's kind of the sound I like anyway. These were a little bit quieter than I expected them to be. And in doing that, I also want to put a turnout on the exhaust. So I'll put a Y in there with a cap underneath the passenger side and driver side door that just comes out beyond the body, because I want to be able to pull the caps off this and run this thing, you know, what's essentially open headered. That went a lot smoother than the last time I brought an engine home. Last time I brought an engine home, I tried taking it out of the bed of my truck with my hoist on some plywood, and I got halfway up the driveway and the stand tipped over and crushed my knee into the ground. So even though the loader was creaking and cracking quite a bit, it handled it better than my hoist did last time. So let's get the stand on here. I may pull the rods out of this, check the bearings, and check the rings to make sure the rings are good. But to be perfectly honest, the way the cylinders in this thing look, and there's no ridge on the top of the cylinder, there's only, well, I can kind of feels like somebody ridge reamed it, because there's almost like a little, feels like almost like a little bit of an indent, but that could just be the oil and stuff. I don't know. I mean, they're standard pistons. They have, I assume, new rings in them. The bearings, the whole bottom end of this thing I can tell is new. All the freeze plugs are new, so we'll check it out and see how it is. But this is going to be my new 350 for my car for now. Well, what's that saying that the guys on Roadkill say? I'm doing the right thing the wrong way. Well, that's pretty much what I'm doing with this block. I pulled the pistons out of it because a couple of the cylinders had some just tarnishy looking stuff in them. And I don't have a dingle ball hone, but I have a stone hone. So I stone honed them using ATF as my lubricant, which I've done before, and it's worked pretty well. The last person that rebuilt this engine put some decent parts in it. It has sealed power flat top pistons in it. And they didn't do a very good job honing it last time. And I can tell this motor sat for a while. You can actually kind of see there's like a kind of shiny spot on there. And that's because the rings were sitting in that spot for quite a while. But there's no rust in these cylinders. Again, that one you can see kind of that shiny spot. But for a backyard rebuild with a standard hone that I have, this is about the best you're going to get. If I had a dingle ball hone, it probably would have done a little bit better job than this. But I've got all the cylinders honed out. I've got the head surfaces all cleaned up. This is the block casting number V0710XI. And it's an 010 high nickel block, 397, I can't really see it too well, but 3970010. So it's exactly the same casting block. Actually, yeah, this isn't a casting, this is a stamping. But the casting is a 3970010, which is a high nickel 4-bolt main block. And again, you can see it is a 4-bolt main. So I got to look up what this block came out of. It has a cast crank in it. So it might have been, it was probably out of like a work truck or something like that. Not necessarily out of a high performance like a Corvette, because the Corvette probably would have had a forged crank in it. But now that I got it all cleaned up, I mean, it's not bad at all. I'm betting this engine probably had about 120,000 miles on it. It was probably pretty well taken care of. And the last person that rebuilt it did a very simple backyard job. The bearings in it don't even look like they've been broken in. The crank is not horrible. If I was really concerned about it, I would probably have the crank or the rod journals polished. But realistically, it's going to be good enough for what I'm doing. The bearings are, like I said, pretty much virtually brand new. So I'm not going to put new bearings in it. I'm going to use my motor assembly grease, put all the pistons back in, and then figure out what cam and lifters I'm going to get for this thing. I think I'm going to put a noisy gear drive in this one because I had that in my C10 years ago and I liked it and I took it out. It makes it sound like it has a supercharger for those people that don't really know anything about engines, and it just makes it sound more radical than it really is. So I might get a noisy gear drive. I'm not sure. I might just go with a double roller timing chain again, because they're a heck of a lot cheaper. I think the cheapest gear drive set is around 90 bucks, and a double roller timing chain is around 40. I don't want to take the cam or the timing set out of the 305. I want to leave that motor together as much as I can, but this will probably get the heads off the 305 because I've already gone through those heads, lapped all the valves, did new valve seals and stuff, and new valve springs. So I know those heads are good to go. The valve springs that are in there are good for up to 500 lift, but the heads themselves will probably only do about 470 lift. And I think this time around, I'm going to go with a mild cam. Like I said, something 450 lift or less. I'm either going to go with a 450 lift radical idle cam. Summit makes one that's a 450 lift that has 106-degree lobe overlap that'll give it a really lumpy idle, or I might just put a kind of like a towing cam in it to give it a lot of torque, because it has the 305 heads. It would build a lot of torque and it would be a low RPM motor. So I haven't quite figured that out yet. I want this to rev around 5 grand, 5,200. So I'll do some math with my engine building program, but this is coming along pretty quick. You know, this morning I was all bummed out wondering what I was going to do, because I didn't really want to spend 1,200 bucks on my 350 that I have for my uncle to have it gone through and cleaned up and bored out and new pistons and have the crank turned and all that stuff. So I'm going to pick all those parts back up from my engine shop buddy. I'm going to probably store them in my basement. I will, you know, lubricate everything to try to keep it from rusting, and probably store it in my basement. But this engine's going together to go in the Bel Air. Then I'll figure out what to do with the 305, if I keep it or try to sell it, or just stuff it in the corner and let it sit for another couple of years until I decide to pull the bottom end apart and put new rings in it, maybe put new bearings in it, and keep that one going too. I don't know. But that's going to do it today from Cranky Motorsports. I did say I was going to do more tractor stuff today, but honestly, the engine got me more excited than anything else, so I wanted to work on this instead.